In this video, we're going to work with sign-in page, and we are going to write some Swift code to read values from text fields like username and password. And then when user clicks on sign-in button, we will send HTTP request to the server side to perform user authentication. Okay, so I will click on this yellow button, sign-in view controller, and open sign-in view controller in Assistant Editor. Okay, here we go. I will hide the right side panel, hide the left side panel, and position my views a little bit so I can see everything well. Okay, so this is the interface, and I'll go to sign-in view controller. So here we go. So this is our sign-in, and this is our Swift code that is associated with this user interface. And we have already created outlets for the username and password, and we have already created the action, which is function with the name sign-in button, and when user taps on sign-in, this function will be called. So the next step for us to be is to read the values from the text fields, and I have prepared a few lines of code so that I don't have to type it. And this is our first step. We read values from text fields, and our text fields are user name text field and user password text field. Okay, so the next step will be for us to check if the required fields are not empty, meaning if username is empty or password is empty, we should not allow user to proceed. And we do that with the if statement. I'll paste the code here. And this is a very easy code. Basically, we check if username is empty or if password is empty. We want to display alert message saying that one of the required fields is missing, and then we want to return. We should not continue with the execution of the rest of the code. And we already have the alert message. I can go to the register user view controller and just copy that function that displays UI alert view controller. Here it is. I'll just copy it from here and then go back to my sign-in view controller and paste it at the bottom. Delete this comment. Here's the code, and it accepts user message. The function name is display message. So after the print statement, this is just for debugging purposes, but after the print statement, I can call this function display user message. I'll just copy it like this and paste it like this, and the user message will be one of the required fields is missing, like this. Okay, so the next step is just before sending HTTP request, we want to display activity indicator, that's circling activity that tells user that something is taking place and they need to wait for a second or so. So I'll copy the code to create activity indicator, but we already have it in our register view controller. So I'll just paste it here. And what it does is we are creating activity indicator with the style gray, and then we're positioning it at the center of the current view, and then we instruct to hide it when it is stopped, and then we start animation and we add this activity indicator as a subview to our main view controller, to our main view. Okay, and now we are ready. Once activity indicator is spinning, we are ready to send HTTP request to our API. And the first line that we need to prepare is the URL that we're sending HTTP request to. And I have my Apache Tomcat running on port 8080, and this is the API web service endpoint that I have created. And you can go to my website, which is called Apps Developer Blog. If you go to this blog, there is a blog post that is called a Restful web service to authenticate user and issue access token. If you go through this blog post, it tells you everything you need to know on how to create a new web service and how to accept HTTP request, exactly the one that I'm sending in this Swift example, and then how to perform user authentication. You have everything, all the source code you need, everything is right here. Okay, but if you're using a different server-side scripts like PHP, for example, then you send the HTTP request to your own web service endpoint. So this is the web service endpoint that receives username and password and performs authentication. I will then convert it into URL request by doing this. And finally, I will configure my HTTP request with HTTP method and the headers and the parameters. And I do this by writing these lines of code. So we have HTTP, we have a URL request, and then we configure it to be performed as HTTP post rather than HTTP GET. So that's going to be HTTP post request, and we are setting the header fields. The content type of our header will be application JSON, so that our server side knows what type of information what type of content we are sending it. So that's going to be a JSON document in the body of HTTP request. And then we are letting server side know also the content type we are ready to accept, and that's also going to be application JSON. Although in the web service that I have created on the apps developer blog, that web service can work with both JSON and XML. Okay, so and this is the post string. Basically, this is an array of key value pairs which is going to be converted into a JSON payload, and this post string contains username and the password. So these are the names of the key, and which will be converted into JSON, and this is the value of that key. Username will be equal to a value of username, and we have created that variable, or in this case it's constant, by reading the value from the user text field. Okay, so now we have the post string, and it's time to convert that post string into a JSON and set it as a part of our request HTTP body. And here's how we do it. We will have to, because that might throw an exception, so we use do, try, and catch. And we are using JSON serialization, which takes in this post string, and then it will convert it into JSON, and it will set it as HTTP body of our request. And if anything happens, we will print out a message to a console, although at this time actually we need to return and maybe display alert message to the user that something went wrong and we are not ready to continue. Something like this. Print an error message and then display alert message, and then stop activity indicator from spinning as well, and remove it from the sub view. Okay, so we will display alert message, something went wrong. Okay, so if our post string is incorrect, then most likely server side will not be able to parse that JSON document and perform user authentication. Okay, so and how to hide activity indicator and how to remove it from the sub view, I will show you just a little bit later now. Okay, so now we are ready, assuming that everything went well here, assuming that post string is converted without any errors into our JSON document. We are now ready to send HTTP request, and we are doing it by executing the task, resumable task. So it starts this way. So we're creating a task object, and that's going to be URL session shared data task. And as soon as this task completes, the piece of code which is inside of this curly brackets will be executed, and the response from the server side that we will receive will be stored in a data object. And then if error takes place, if something went wrong, we will have an error object populated. So one last part to complete this task is that the task needs to be resumable, so we will have to have this task resume. Okay, so and once this task is executed, and by the way, this is going to be an asynchronous request, so it will not block the main user interface or the main thread of your application, and all communication from within this asynchronous task will need to be performed on the main queue. So now, once we have received a response from the server, we need to remove activity indicator, because we have received a response from server side. We don't need that spinning activity indicator we have created here and added to the subview, so we need to remove it. And the function to remove activity indicator we already have in the register view controller, so I'll just copy it and go to my sign in view controller and paste it at the bottom here. Okay, so this function takes the activity indicator, and then see it runs the asynchronous task on the main queue, and from that asynchronous task it stops activity indicator from animating, and then it removes it from the super view. Okay, so we have received response from the server, we have removed activity indicator, and now we need to make sure that this response is okay, there is no error. And we do it by doing this if statement. If error object is not nil, if there is something in the error object, then we display a friendly message to the user, and we can, for debugging purposes, we can print error description to the console and have a look at it. But you can also return a message from the server side, although if your application is internationalized, you probably want to display this friendly user messages to the user in different languages. So your server side code will most likely need to return a special error message key, which you can use to pick up a friendly message from one of your property files, and then display that error message based on the key error message key that server side sends you. But this example is very much simplified, so I'm simply displaying a friendly user message which is hard-coded in my display message function. Okay, so assuming there is no error message, so now we will need to convert this JSON, this data object that we have received, into a dictionary, because we have got a data object, but for us to be able to work with it, we will need to convert it to a more friendly format. So we will do it by doing this do try, and I need to copy catch as well. Do try and catch. So we will again use JSON serialization, and it takes in object data which we have received here, and then it will convert that into a dictionary, NS dictionary, and we can work with NS dictionary as we work with it in Objective-C or Swift. So now we have JSON, and we need to make sure that it's not empty. So we will use iflet to check if this JSON has anything in it, then it will be saved in the parse JSON object. And otherwise, we will again need to display a message that could not successfully perform this operation or something like this. Like if JSON return does not contain anything, then we need to let user know that something went wrong. Okay, but if it does contain something, then we know that there should be a user ID and there should be access token that server-side generates for us to be able to communicate with protected web services. So we need to read this value. So, and the way we read these values is by doing this. So my HTTP response, I know, will contain token and ID. I know it because I was the one to create the server-side entry point, and once the user is authenticated, I will return back a JSON payload that will contain a user ID and token. This is the authentication details that will be returned, ID and token. So this is what I'm going to read from this parse JSON. I'm going to read token, and that's going to be a string value, and I'm going to read ID, and I'm storing it into user ID variable, or constant in this case. And once I have them, the next step will be to store them in a keychain, but I'll show you how to do that a little bit later in a different video, which will be all about the keychain. But for now, let's just check that the access token is not empty, because if it is, if we did not receive access token from the server side, again, something went wrong. We need to display a message to the user that we could not successfully perform this request, and then return. But if everything was okay, if access token is there, and we can also check that if user ID is also there, if authentication is successful, then we can take user to the home page, to the protected page on which only authenticated users are allowed to access. And again, because we are running this code within an asynchronous task, we need to perform, we need to dispatch another asynchronous task on the main queue. And you are familiar with this code already. So what we are doing here, we are referencing a storyboard, and then we are instantiating a view controller from that storyboard, and this view controller must have an identifier which is called this. But my Xcode is highlighting, telling me that it cannot find a view controller with this identifier. So I will go to the storyboard and copy the view controller of homepage view controller. Right, so I go to home main storyboard, and then I go to my protected page, click on the view controller, open up the right side panel, and under identity inspector, here's the custom class, and here's the storyboard identifier which I need to use. And I usually keep this custom class and identity storyboard ID of the same value, exactly the same. So I go back to my sign-in view controller, and I'll paste the value of identifier, and I'll paste the value of this view controller type. So it's a home page view controller. Okay, so and once I have this view controller, I now need to set this view controller, this home page, as a root view controller of my main window. So I don't need sign-in page anymore. I want to replace that sign-in page with the home view controller. I don't want to display home view controller on top of sign-in page. I'm replacing it. So I'm setting the root view controller of my window to the new home page view controller. And this is it. If everything is okay, we should be able to log in and then redirect user to the home page view controller. The only task that remains to be done is to save this access token and user ID into a keychain. But as I've mentioned a bit earlier, I will do it as a separate video to make this one shorter. Okay, so let's run this application and see if it works. Okay, my application is up and running. I will right away click on sign in button to make sure that my validation code works. So it says one of the required fields is missing. Everything is good. So now I know I have an account which I have registered, and this is an account that has username sergey@kargapolov.com. This is a fake email address. Do not try to communicate with me on this email address, and the password is 123 that I have created. Now I'll click on sign in, and I'm in. So I'm in the home page view controller, which is protected. And if I look on the console here, the sign in button is tapped and the access token is printed, which is this line. So I can set a breakpoint here to make sure my user ID and access token are not empty. So if I stop this application and let me run it again, let's debug it, make sure user ID is not empty as well. Okay, my application is here, so I will try to log in again. Sergey at kargapolov.com, and then 123, sign in. And here's our activity indicator circling. Everything is working. So here's an access token. We'll just play this line. We see that access token is not empty, it's here. And we see that user ID now is also not empty. This is secure user ID value, not a database sequential user ID. And then we will store this user ID and access token in the keychain. And I will print this line just for our informational purposes. We will comment this out, we don't need to print it, and play this, and we are inside of the home page. Okay, so this is it for this video. Let's continue with the protected page.